Great. So, welcome everybody. As I was just saying, the last FSI Small International Development Charities Programme session of 2021. Hope to see you all in the next year as well. We're very excited to have Ben Skelton, impact expert extraordinaire and chief executive of Dig Deep, with us to run this session. It's 90 minutes, as you know, and it should be very helpful. We've got some breakout room sessions, as well as some activities, as well as the sort of key content in those slides. You'll get the slides after the session. So welcome. Could you take us to the next slide, please, Ben? Just a bit of info here about the SIDC program, and also an intro because it might be the case that some of you aren't super familiar with the FSI. We are a small charity ourselves. We exist to help make the UK's small charities more independent, effective, and sustainable. So we we help build leadership, we help raise the voice of small charities with policymakers, and we help with fundraising training and all sorts of help and advice hub and support to help charities be those effective, sustainable organizations that we know you can be and are. And we are excited to be running the Small International Development Charities Programme 2021 and 2022. So we are aware of obviously the UK aid funding cuts that happened last year. This programme is funded with the sort of remains of that programme. So I'm also admitting people in. Hello Liz, hello Eddie. So this is a bit of a summary of some of the things that are available as part of this Small International Development Charities Programme specifically. We're about to launch our 2022 session, so do keep an eye out for those. There's an advice and mentoring service or peer support match, which is more of a sort of one-on-one, someone else in the sector. So we'll have a little poll at the end in case you're interested in that. So do answer yes if you'd like us to put you in touch with someone just for kind of informal chats about your work. We've recently launched a series of on-demand recordings. We know it can be difficult to make the time to attend something live. So we've got a session on safeguarding, partnership working. Do have a look at that website page at the bottom to check out what we've got available on demand. And then we've also got bursaries on the FSI's core program, which would usually cost £20 with a deposit. And you can get that just straight for free if you're under 250k a year is our stipulation, but we can accept some evidence for that if that's not what the Charity Commission says. Cool. So that's a bit of a rundown. We're excited to be here. Do get in touch if you'd like to talk about any help that your charity is interested in specifically as an international development charity. As I say, this is a program that we've got going on at the moment. Do complete your pre and post webinar surveys, please, because then we can give you back your £10 deposit on the space, which we just used to, be a bit of an incentive there. So I know that people did put a £10 deposit down on the space. We are using the chat function to network. So as mentioned, we will be sharing the slides and doing some breakout rooms. So do put your LinkedIn details on the session if you'd like to do a bit more networking other than who you end up with in your breakout rooms. So we do encourage that. I know it's people are keen to maybe do that instead of email addresses. We'll not be using the Q&A function. We will be checking attendance, and that's when your post-webinar survey will come through, is when we mark you as attended, and you'll get that link through. Slides will be available, so don't be rushing too much to write down things that are on the slides, because we will make those available to you. And I think we're ready for the next slide. And this is just a bit of a intro, or we've got a bit of info here about how to get your resources for the session. That's how you log in on our website. If you sign in there, and then under My Resources, you'll see the slides tomorrow. Brilliant. I think that's my gumph. Very excited to be able to join everyone for this last session of the year. Good that we've had the scheduling to get this last one in there. Hello, people saying hi on the chat. Do give us a wave. You can, if you make sure you're sending it to everyone in meeting or to just everyone on that chat, and then do feel free. Thanks, Ben. Next slide. Do feel free to just say who you are and where you're from, and that's just a nice way to make sure, oh, a bit more housekeeping. There's a little live stream notification. That's just telling you that the closed captioning is live streaming to itself. So if you would like the live transcript, you can click that and you should be able to view that. Excellent. Do share on the chat function your intros, and the deposit refunds will be coming back to you. Hi, Sean. Thanks, everyone, introing themselves on the chat. And brilliant. Thank you. I will hand over to Ben now. Do put your name in there just so we know what's going on. It's nice to be able to be aware who's around. Brilliant. Thanks, Ben.
Housekeeping done?
Housekeeping done, and there's this last intro slide, so but we're doing that, so that's us done. Thanks, Ben.
Cool, I'll crack on. Right, hi guys, I'm Ben. I'm a trainer at the FSI. The core of this session is based on all the FSI's research and lived experience, but I'm also going to be drawing a bit on my own experiences. So just to very briefly introduce myself, I've been chief exec of a small international development charity called Dig Deep for the last 10 years. We're a water, sanitation, hygiene NGO, partnering with the Kenyan government. I was the first UK member of staff. I've now got a team of 15 Kenyan and UK staff and about 300 volunteers. So I built it up from quite kitchen table beginning. So I've got a very good idea of what it's like trying to both do the work you guys are trying to do and also trying to figure out how to monitor and evaluate at the same time when you have limited resources, limited people, limited time. In terms of my own journey with M&E, we're now working on a fairly large scale as an organisation. So, for example, the last 6 months, we've been monitoring wash access for a constituency in Kenya of about 250,000 people. So this involved surveying around 13,000 households, 200 schools, 30 health centres, mapping every single water source in this area, conducting like 50 different focus groups, and then we tried to integrate that as much as possible with the county and national government to strengthen their monitoring capacity. So, for example, we've helped the local government set up a new department purely to hold and monitor wash data. That's the cleaned up LinkedIn version of what we've done. In reality, we've made loads and loads and loads and loads of mistakes along the way. And over the next 90 minutes, my core mission is to help you avoid at least some of the mistakes that we've made over the last few years. I really wish I'd done this course personally 10 years ago when I started trying to figure out M&E rather than learn the hard way. So we're going to try and cover a lot in the next 90 minutes. 80 minutes remaining. It's mostly going to be me talking, but we will have 2 short breakouts. You guys will have a chance to ask questions. Lots of ground to cover, so if it's okay, please put your questions in the chat rather than unmuting, and then we'll have bits where we can stop and have a chat as we go along. M&E is pretty daunting, at least it can be at first, but it is worth it, is the key thing I want to get across today. If you get it right, it'll improve the quality of the programs you're delivering with your beneficiaries, and in my experience, it'll help you get more funding in the door as well. So I'm going to start with a bit of a jargon buster. Sorry guys, screen's gone blank, one sec. And we're back in the room, slight technical hitch. So I'm going to start with a jargon buster. You really need to wrap your head around these key terms if you're going to make M&E work for you. So I'm going to start at the bottom of this list and work our way up. So for each, I'm also going to give an example of what these terms would mean. I'm going to use an example of an organisation that's trying to, say, improve menstrual health, to try and flesh this out a bit for you guys. So first of all, you need to get your head around activities. So activities are the actions, tasks, and work a project organisation carries out to create its outputs and outcomes and achieve its aims. It can also be called processes or interventions. So one thing a charity trying to improve menstrual health could do, for example, as an activity would be to improve and maintain sanitation facilities. That would be an example of an activity. When it comes to outputs, these are the products, services, or facilities that result from organisations or projects' activities. For example, workshops, leaflets, casework sessions, or brokerage services. So going back to the example of menstrual health charity, the output of improving and maintaining sanitation facilities would be functioning toilets with access to water, locks, bins, soap, and toilet paper available. Then we come on to outcomes. Now, this is the changes, benefits, learning, or other effects that result from what the project or organisation makes, offers, or provides. So again, going up this list of, we had the activity, which was improving sanitation facilities. We had the output, which was functioning toilets with access to water, etc. And then the outcome in that situation could be better menstrual health management for those girls. And then you have the ultimate final goal. This describes why the organisation or project exists and the broad effect it wants to have. It summarises the difference you want to make. So the very top level for that menstrual health charity, it could be something like improved education, health and well-being for women and girls. If you take one thing away from this session, I think probably the most helpful thing is just a clear understanding of the terms, and we will be coming back to these several times as we go through the next few minutes. These are 5 questions that ideally you need to have a clear answer to before embarking on an M&E journey. So firstly, what is the problem you are trying to address? What do you do to address it? What are we achieving? How do we know we are achieving this? What are we learning and how can we improve? Now they seem, I think they're deceptively simple questions. So a lot of organisations, including my own, I think would struggle to answer 1 or 2 of those very, very clearly. But when you start off with M&E, I'd strongly suggest sitting down and getting very good answers as clear as you can at this point to those questions. And the third thing I want to go about before we dive into the planning phase for M&E is that it's not a one-off activity. It should become a continual process within your organisation and really an important part of management and development. It can be very much linked into performance management of team members as well. So looking at this impact cycle, the idea is very simply that you plan the thing, you monitor a thing, you use the data you've got from you've gathered to evaluate the thing, and then you use the findings to improve future work. And you can also improve those findings to do stuff like advocacy or fundraising. In my experience, the benefit of this process is that through evaluation, you deliver better services for beneficiaries. You have increased transparency for your organisation. And again, in my experience, that often results in more money coming towards the organisation and also increased ability to influence. So one of the things my organisation does is advocacy to improve water sanitation policy in like local government in Kenya. And as soon as we improved our M&E and had transparency about what was happening, it meant that it actually resulted because the government could see very clearly the impact we were having, they were more likely to listen to us. Your organisation will remain, I think, more flexible and innovative if you really embed M&E as primary to your purpose. It's open-ended. It's an open-ended process. You don't know where it is going to take you. So again, I won't go into detail on organisation, but effective monitoring evaluation changes from an organisation that primarily built things like taps and toilets into an organisation that built the capacity of county government to do those things themselves, because our M&E showed us that that was going to be a more effective way of going about it. I'm going to go into planning session first. I don't know if I had any questions in the chat, Remy, that have popped up so far.
We've not had anything direct so far on the content.
Cool.
Thanks, Ben.
Brilliant. I'll keep an eye on. So in this section, we're going to talk about planning, which is just the process of deciding really what change you want to make and how you're going to measure it. It's really that simple. So we're going to look at theories of change. Now, there are a few different definitions of this, as of what a theory of change is. One I really like is a theory of change is a description of why a particular way of working is effective, showing how change happens in the short, medium, long term to achieve an intended impact. Theories of change typically come in 3 different flavors, and we're going to go through all of them. But before we dive into those, I just want to flag that an issue some people have with theories of change is that I've definitely met a few people who can be quite dogmatic about them. So I just want to say, caveat everything I'm saying here is obviously there's a lot of different ways of writing down and communicating ideas, and these aren't the be all and end all. The reason that we're going into these three different types is that firstly, they're very commonly used and understood across the sector, which means it's likely that both your partners and donors will recognise them, and that in turn will increase your ability to communicate with other organisations. And personally, I found them really useful, sharpening my own thinking, so hopefully you will too. So first theory of change we're going to look at is the CES planning triangle. So this is one of the simplest ways to approach a theory of change, and a good place to start if you're really new to the method. It's a very visual tool, and it's developed by the Charities Evaluation Service, the CES, which helps define three key elements of projects. So we're looking, as you can see on this, from the bottom to top of the triangle, activities, intermediate outcomes, and final goals. So in terms of how to use it, it's a really quite simple three-step process. You begin by agreeing your final goal and add this to the top of the diagram. So that's very deliberately at the top of the triangle, a small amount of space. It encourages you to keep it short and sweet. After this, you populate the middle section with intermediate outcomes. These should all be plausibly linked to your project and occur within its lifetime. So the stuff that you're doing that will happen before you finish the project. When developing intermediate outcomes, it's good to use words associated with change. So think more, less, better, improved. It helps to ask yourself when doing this, I find, what needs to change in order to achieve your final goal, and what changes will your product help to make your service what changes will your product help to make for your service users and beneficiaries. And then finally, maybe the simplest bit at the bottom of the diagram, you should list the activities you'll deliver to achieve the intermediate outcomes. Each activity should have a direct link to one or more of the intermediate outcomes. If not, if it doesn't have that link, ask yourself, why is the activity included? And this can be really, I found this really, really insightful when I've gone through this process, because it really helps you to focus up on the things that are actually achieving the intermediate outcomes and final goals, rather than trying to do a bit of everything. So you can see that I've highlighted the activities, intermediate outcomes and final goals in blue. The examples I gave earlier from our menstrual hygiene management, imaginary menstrual health NGO. So at the bottom we have the activity, which I said before, which is improving and maintaining wash facilities in schools. In terms of intermediate outcome, we then have better menstrual health management. And then the final goal, we have improved education, health and well-being for women and girls. The second one I'm going to look at is the logical framework, which in my personal experience is probably the most common flavour of these three theories of change we're going to look at. I've read different things about this. Most people seem to think it was developed initially in the 1960s by USAID. It works in the same way as the CES triangle, but normally turned on its side. So instead of the activities moving up to the final goal, you're reading it left to right. So activities through the final goal on the right. I put the same examples in here to try and make it really clear for you guys. So the bit one's educated in blue. So we have the activity, and that's improving and maintaining wash facilities. We then have the outputs, which was missing from the CES triangle. And that is functioning toilets with access to water, locks, bin, soap, toilet paper available. So that's the output you're trying to get. And that goes back to the definition of output I gave on the first slide. You then have short-term outcomes, so better menstrual health management. So you'd hope in the short term having a functioning toilet would then lead to better menstrual health management. And then the longer term output, you'd hope that having better menstrual health management, your aim is to improve educational performance for girls. And then you have the same final goal there, which is improved education, health and well-being for women and girls. I hope that's clear. This is a really kind of shorn down, simple version of a log frame. They do come in lots of different varieties, and some are a bit more complicated. So sometimes they're set out vertically, so the activities, etc., are along the side. Sometimes there isn't any distinction made between the short-term outcomes and the long-term outcomes. So those two columns are merged. That's actually a simplification, really. And sometimes you can add an indicator, a means of verification column to each of the outcome columns. So I've included here I know it's too small for you guys to read, but hopefully you can just see, this is This is a log frame from my organization that we've developed recently. And down the left-hand side, you see the impact, outcomes, output, and activities. And along the top, you can see the summary, and it's chopped off on my screen, but hopefully you guys can see the points up there. So time frame, risk assumptions, etc. So obviously this is a lot more detailed. This is kind of obviously a bit scarier looking than this version of the log frame, but this is the kind of thing that can be worked up to. And this is exactly the same logic applied to it, just a bit more detail put into the columns. And the third flavor we're going to look at is outcome chains. So an outcome chain shows all the outcomes from short term to longer term required to bring about the ultimate goal of the intervention. So these are more difficult to describe in a nutshell because really you can be much more creative in how you go about doing it. The good thing about them is it will help you to better understand the ways your outcomes interact and the dependencies between them. And that can be a shortcoming of log frames because you're thinking quite a linear way. You can obviously everyone's really in reality dealing with very complex systems, and log frames can sometimes simplify that. And so outcome chains try and overcome that problem. Also offers good opportunity to engage your program stakeholders in discussion about the program, because most people I think will find a diagram like this more engaging than a diagram like this or this one. So you can potentially engage a much wider group of people, and crucially your beneficiaries, in talking about this. So this is an example from the Fiverr Children's Foundation. Now, the Fiverr Children's Foundation is a comprehensive youth development organisation that makes a 10-year commitment to children from underserved communities through character building, summer and year-round out-of-school workshops. So just to explain this, the kids doing this are called Fivers. So when I'm talking about a Fiver, I'm talking about one of the beneficiaries of this organisation. Now they've mapped out these 3 different pathways in this outcome chain. I'm just going to follow one on the left-hand side, which is the education and careers pathway. And just to talk you guys through the logic of this, the green bits here are the activities, the intervention of the organisation, and then the bits in clear, the bits within the clear brown boxes are the things they're making happen. So you're going to get a whole view of my face as I zoom in to actually try and read this print for you. But so you can see at the start, they, if someone goes down the education careers pathway, they first of all get 2 weeks of out-school training, and that improves that makes them understand the unique strengths. They then move up the left-hand side to have one-to-one coaching, basically outside of school, and that demonstrates curiosity and to stay in school. I won't go through every single bit, but you can see how the green bits are producing the change, which is the output, outcomes, and then the ultimate impact at the top. There's lots of different ways of doing this. You can be incredibly creative, and I think in my experience, what you prefer will depend on your individual learning style and that of your team and the people you're working with. I'm personally much more comfortable with kind of the spreadsheet version of it, which is a log frame, but I know a lot of people who really like these and engage with them a lot more. So
we have sorry, Ben. Sorry to interrupt. Had a couple of questions. I'm sorry, Tabitha, that it's not bigger. It's quite a complicated thing to get onto one screen. We just had a question from Tabitha there, but we will be sharing all the slides. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Ben, but I thought there was a very interesting question as well in the chat, which I just wanted to flag before we go on to the next bit, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Great. So there was a question from Mariam just about, which is a bit of a classic one, and maybe good to just be super, go on about that a bit. Just the question is, how does output differ from outcome indicator, which I know is a classic question.
I'm going to go back to these examples and try and pull out a difference. Philosophically, I do have some real issues with this, because I think people try and pretend there's a clear and cut distinction, and I've come across examples where there just isn't. So it is a complicated thing, and the problem with the log frame really is it tries to distinguish between these things, right? Yeah. And it depends on the precise definition. So some funders will have extremely lengthy definition of what they see as an output and what they see as an outcome. So I'm not sure I'm answering that question by saying it's complicated, but if you are applying to a specific donor and they're asking you to come with log frame and that's why you're doing it, it's worth looking into their definition of it. But broadly speaking, the output, in my experience, tends to be something you could quite often put a number next to. So you could actually say, right, that's improved this number of toilets. And then but better menstrual health is something that you can't put one simple number next to. You're gonna have you're gonna have to collect a lot more data on. But we'll come back to this as we go into different forms of data collection later in the session, and hopefully that will clear. But I'm very happy to come back to that during the discussion during the breakout session and see if we can clear that up a bit more. So, well, time's going out the window, and I know people have to leave. So now I'm going to talk a bit about monitoring, how to monitor, evaluate. So collecting and analysing data about the changes your work creates. As I say, we're a little bit behind, so I'm going to fly through this because I know this is already a little bit definition heavy, and a lot of M&E workshops are, so I apologise for that. But these are in general the kind of different levels of data that you can collect. Like a lot of things we're talking about, these are quite contested terms, but in general, demographic data refers to data that is of statistically socioeconomic in nature, such as population, race, income, education, employment, or represents a specific geographical location. Engagement data represents the ongoing interaction between a stakeholder and a project or organisation. So interactions can include any training session, as you are now, reading content, visiting a given place or service. Feedback, this is when stakeholders are giving information about the project, or specifically, they might, most commonly it's people who are using the service, but it can be any other type of stakeholder. And then outcomes, we've already looked at outcomes. So the two examples we have from our IHM NGO were better menstrual health management and improved educational performance for girls. Going into a bit more detail on outcomes. So these are, to recap, these are the changes, benefits, learning, or other effects that result from what the project organisation makes, offers, or provides, is in the broadest understanding of it. They can be both short and long term. So actually a good example is this training session. Immediately following this training session, if I've done my job properly, we hope to see an increase in knowledge, skills, and confidence, fingers crossed. But long term, we want to see you applying these skills you have learned to improve your impact practice and strengthen your organisation. So that is all, I believe, in the FSI's logical framework, which we are currently enacting through doing this. There can be hard outcomes or soft outcomes. So hard outcomes are things we can readily quantify. So it's typically a yes or no. So did someone get a job? Did they reoffend or not? Soft outcomes are less quantifiable. So that can be something along the lines of improving someone's self-esteem or aspirations for themselves and their family. Important, but very difficult to put, and much more difficult to put a number on. They can be intended or unintended. So a lovely example the FSI has picked up on that is from a small international development charity you may have heard of called Village to Village, which has a bike recycling scheme to provide transport to kids in rural parts of Ghana. They gave kids loads of bikes, and the issue was before that kids were late because it was such a long walk, so they expected attendance to go up. And I suppose, well, along with educational attainment, so the kids were in school, they'd probably be learning more, etc., etc. But in fact, attendance actually got worse. So to investigate this, their project worker waited by the school one morning to try and understand what was going on. It turned out the students who had been given bikes were ferrying other kids to school, making multiple trips back and forth. But it then meant those kids who had the bikes were late for class. Which actually, but the net result they figured out was more kids being to school on time, but the kids who got the bike were missing bits of education. So they had to adapt their M&E, their monitoring process to account for that, and also share the bikes out a bit, I think was the other outcome, to make sure it isn't the same kids doing it the whole time. But there's a really good example of how you can have an unintended consequence. They can be negative or positive. So we all set out to create positive change. The terrifying reality is the impact can be negative as well. So really, I suppose, obvious one is the negative outcomes that might be experienced by a different group of stakeholders. So a good example is a well-known international development charity drilled a lot of wells in Bangladesh in the 70s, and it was only in the 90s they realised these were very high in fluoride, having long-term health impacts, because the fluoride levels take a long time to build in people's systems, but when they do, they have really bad impacts on people's bone density, etc. So that's obviously a scary example. The one that scared me, especially in the wash sector, was a study done by I want to say John Hopkins, like about 2015, where they were looking at organisations that were building latrines for schools where there weren't latrines before. And so what they did was measure the level of E. coli, so effectively shit on children's hands. And what they found is that after the intervention, the level of E. coli went up. And the reason for that was that well, they think the reason for that was because they hadn't focused any energy on or resources on hygiene promotion. So the kids were using these toilets, but didn't know how to use it because they've never used a toilet before, and it was having a really bad impact. So you need I think stories like that are why I've focused more and more energy over time on monitor evaluation, because you don't unless you're measuring stuff and making room to see what could be going wrong, you don't really know what's happening. So it's kind of, as much as it's like a really positive thing for organization, it's also a safety valve to make sure you're not doing something which could be an issue. And going back to the earlier example, if they'd actually done a more thorough analysis on the quality of the water, they would have spotted that, and a lot of people would have been saved a lot of suffering. Outcomes might come in sequences. I'll try to illustrate that on these slides. So say your work is Charities trying to do training in CV and interview skills. There's different sequences and work together. So sequence one I put down here, improve skills and confidence. So that training on CV and interview skills, improve skills and confidence, submits better quality, then the person who gets that training submits better quality applications, performs better interviews, then secures employment. Sequence two is increased confidence, means they're more motivated to submit applications. They submit more applications, so they secure employment. Secure employment. What the point I'm trying to get across to that is that the skill increase and the confidence increase are different things, but they can lead into the same. They can lead into the exact the same result at the end. And so it's really good to. It's good that's why that log frame we showed at the beginning was broken down into like short term and longer term outputs as well, because it's quite interesting to look at. Finally, these things often don't happen in a straight line. So a really good example that's actually it's quite close to me personally actually is the Gordon Moody Association. They work with they provide residential treatment for people who are addicted to gambling. What they found is that people's outcomes tend to score worse 2 weeks after admission to that residential treatment. And that's because they're starting to confront the challenges they're facing and the harm they've experienced and inflicted through their addiction. Based on that evaluation, the charity is now putting additional support around those areas, and also providing. They saw a similar effect at the end, where they were looking to leave the residential home, and they saw a similar effect that they got worse for the 2 weeks prior to leaving. So they're also putting in more help there to get people back on track. So again, that's really interesting, and they've continued the program despite the fact they see the rather initial dip, because they see the long-term output for it. They can show the long-term output for it is so effective. Time check, back on track. Last bit on outcomes. So once you've decided what your outcomes are, you need to decide how to measure them. So to do that, you're going to need outcome indicators, and these are generally well-defined pieces of information that can be assessed or measured to tell you that your outcome has been achieved. Now, they're nearly always an indication the outcome has actually been achieved. They're quite often a proxy indicator. So they're an indication that outcome's been achieved or progress has been made towards it. They can be quantitative or qualitative. So quantitative indicators count numbers of things that happen, and qualitative indicators assess people's perceptions and experiences. There may be many possible indicators for each outcome. As with outcomes themselves, you really want to identify and focus on the key ones. One is absolutely fine, and I guess FSI would recommend no more than 3 per outcome. It's so easy to absolutely overwhelm yourself and your organization through, and I've been there, thinking, oh, just measure one more thing, measure one more thing. And then once you multiply that by 1,000 surveys, you just have monster spreadsheets coming through that might not be very helpful. And I've certainly created quite a few graveyards of data when I started doing M&E, because I felt I need to measure everything, but it just means you can't see the wood for the trees. So just be as ruthless as you possibly can when choosing indicators. And now on to data collection methods. So like, how do you actually go about collecting this stuff? So external data, start there. Like again, with my own experience, I jumped to, I need to write a survey, and it's like, no, maybe you don't need to. Maybe the government where you're working is already collecting this stuff. Maybe other charities are already collecting this information, and it might not be immediately visible to you. Quite often, these things don't really show up very quickly in a Google search. So use your local stakeholders, use your local network to try and just have a dig about to find if there's any what information is out there. So obvious stuff, school records, health records, depends on what your organisation is doing, but just always start with that. Surveys, the most obvious thing people go to after that. So they vary in length from 3 questions being asked to people to several thousands in some cases. So it depends on level of number of beneficiaries, level of depth. Focus group discussions, I love these. The way I think about it is that you get this quantitative data, but it doesn't really tell you why things are happening. If you get the qualitative data from focus groups, it just puts flesh on the bones of all those numbers you've got and helps you really understand what's going on. Also, from from a fundraising point of view, you have to anonymize, and there's research ethics you need to think about. But if you can, even anonymized quotes come out of focus groups can be so revealing about the level of need or the impact of the program. And the same goes for interviews. So interviews are when you sit down and have a structured interview, or say maybe unstructured, with people who tend to refer to as key informants. So in my charity's case, it would be like the local MP or the local person who runs the local health service, or that tends to be high chain. But then you can also get key informants who are a randomly selected mother from one of the communities we work in, etc. Observations, that's looking at stuff. So is this thing that we built actually working? And if we built 50 of them, are we going to let's go around and look at all of them and do a quick structured observation? A really simple thing, again, I know this is quite wash heavy from my background, but I think it's a good example, is one of the key indicators of success with water sanitation is ending open defecation in the community. And one of the key observations there is you just do a direct walk. Whoever's doing the monitoring does a direct walk from one corner of the community to the other and just sees if they can see any open defecation happening. So it's a really direct, simple way of just saying, like, is this actually correlated to the reality on the ground? And then you've got a load of informal methods, so like tokens, beads, so pictures, drawings. So tokens, beads, just to explain that. The idea is, if you guys must have been to IKEA at some point for your sins, you'll see, I don't know if you've seen the way out, they've got this little board. You've got a smiley face and a neutral face and a sad face, and you just hit the one which you, it's basically like a participatory equivalent of that. So you can give every child a red bead and every parent a blue bead, and just ask them to put in three different jars to see on the way out anonymously, just to see how much they enjoyed the session. So just to give really practical examples, is just put jars behind a curtain. Everyone goes in one by one, puts their bead in the way out, and at the end you can see whether everyone found it super helpful or super not helpful. And it's just it's again, I think like a lot of us always got one eye on fundraising. That can be, if you take a picture, if you've nailed it and you take a picture of like the one that said this had been a good session, completely full of beads, it says, is that someone asked a question? Cool.
I'm just going to mute. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, cool. I think the last thing I'd say when you're doing this is, and I touched on this earlier with John's question, don't reinvent the wheel. I did this a lot at the start of my time trying to do M&E. For some reason I had in my head that we needed totally original surveys to do stuff, or I had to make up how to focus group from scratch, using my own limited training research methods. That's not the case at all. So just in the last year, John, I asked the same question, like how do you measure system strength? And I reached out to a couple of people I know at WaterAid, and they put me in touch with people at Water People, and they put me in touch with RC. And now I've just made a Frankenstein monster of their tools, which is working very well. Equally, menstrual health has been a bigger part of our program for the last couple of years, and we've just got loads of help from a really amazing small charity called iRise International, who specialise in doing. We were trying to measure some stuff to do with perception of mental health in communities we work in, and they were like, John, we just developed with Johns Hopkins University over the last 5 years a validated tool for doing that. You should probably use that. And I wouldn't have known that existed otherwise. And it's so simple to go and grab these things and just put them in place. So if only develop something new, if you're absolutely certain that that it doesn't make damn sure that something, a tool that you need doesn't already exist. On that, and these two things overlap. I'm a big advocate for where at all possible, make sure the data you're collecting, where possible, integrates with the district, national, international monitoring, because then you can contribute directly towards that. And that's also great for your organization because it gives you visibility, so you can plug into the national databases. So in Kenya, there's a database showing where communities that are open defecation free are, they go green. And now, because of our work with the county government, where in the county we work with, it's going green very, very quickly, and it's got international attention. People just get in touch with saying, "How are you making this green so quickly?" So yeah, I think that's that. In terms of building local capacity and localization agenda, I'm really I would strongly advocate for as much as possible plugging into the local systems that already exist and using them. I digress slightly, but it's just something to consider. We're now going to go into breakout number 2. A little bit behind time, so I think we might try and do this as a group discussion if you guys are up for chatting. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can all see each other.
There was a question just before we kick off about the name of the menstrual health management tool monitoring. You mentioned iRise, and then there was a tool. If you were able to pop that in the chat, that would be fab.
I will find it. Actually, I'll find it after the session because I know it's 3 links.
We'll make sure everyone gets that link.
We'll bring that across. Yeah, I don't know if you got. I know iRise are quite big at FS. They've done a few sessions at FSI as well. Yeah, massively rate their work. They are brilliant. So if you're doing anything around menstrual health, especially if you work in East Africa, they just launched the community of practice there, which is brilliant. Yeah, look that up. Yeah, so the questions that I'd like to try and discuss now, and as I say, I don't think we've got time for breakout rooms, so just wonder if you guys want to shout out or put in the chat. What challenges do you experience in collecting data, and how have others addressed these challenges? So if you just answer the first one, maybe if everyone, a lot of people don't seem to be able to go on video, if people could just put in the chat what challenges they've faced, and then maybe we could sort of brainstorm how people have addressed those challenges.
Can I just speak instead of typing? Yeah. Only because I've got a sore shoulder. I've experienced really big challenges with getting quality information from our partners, even when we've worked really hard with them to try and develop questions that are really clear, that should provide us the kind of information we want. It seems like often it comes back without anything much, and so it's really hard to then report back to donors, for example. I'm trying to, I can't think of a good example at this moment, but you know, when you're trying, so you were talking about, say, focus groups, I find it really hard to get any of that good quality kind of contextual information, or information, say, about how something's really benefited someone's life. And you might just get people saying, this is good, or yes, it's okay, thank you. Or do you see what I mean? I don't know how you go beyond that.
I guess my really honest answer is my M&E got a lot better when I stopped trying to do it all myself, or get my local team to, and just invested money in getting experts in.
Okay.
And I think it's not the answer you want from a small organisation. Your budgets are really tight, but hopefully what I'm getting across here is the value of M&E and how M&E can actually help your fundraising. So it's not a zero-sum game. And I think like we've done really well with regards to focus groups. Leading focus groups is a really, really difficult skill. Like I think like it's not an easy thing to do at all. And you need to get exactly the right person in there to do that. And like we had a collaboration a few years ago between like our local team and a PhD student who was researching mental health in East Africa. And they went out together and did these focus groups, but it took a month to design the focus group and get it right. That was a volunteer as well, so it didn't necessarily cost that much money. I'm not saying you need to go to like the big consultancy firms and pay 70 grand or whatever to get an evaluation done.
Mm.
It's just thinking within your network, or I mean, a really good simple resource is people want to write PhDs, and part of that they have to collect data. So if you can plug into university and just say, I've got an opportunity for you to do research, I need you to do 30 focus groups, but then that is the data you can use for your project, your original piece of research. That's quite an easy way in. But yeah, I think it's saying it's not I underestimated how difficult it is to do monitoring evaluation. And it's just being kind to yourself and saying, look, we can't just do this with one person working on it like half a day a week. It needs to be probably more than that if you want to do it, or dramatically reduce what you're trying to measure. That's the other, because I don't know what's right for your organization depends on what you're trying to achieve. And the reason that I'm not interested in my organization, like developing new tools, or whatever, is that we're an implementing organization. We're not a research organization. I want to be able to do it good enough.
Yeah.
And it's just, so you either change the good enough level or you have to invest. I think
That's helpful, thank you.
super long-winded answer, sorry.
No, perfect. Thank you.
Had a few hands up, John and Amanda, and
Amanda, do you want to go? I think you first.
Yeah, it's just the issues. Again, I work in East Africa, and ours is to do with technology, about how we share this information from our projects in East Africa back to the UK. We're very, very small. We don't have anybody who deals with that sort of stuff. So we're all kind of, our trustees are learning. But has anybody got any advice on that? They're looking at using Google Docs so that we can access it easy. But I've heard that there are other systems, but I don't know much about them. Has anybody got any experience? Ours is to do with internet dropout as well. It depends if the balloon's over the project at the time.
Does anyone want to feedback on that?
Quick one. I mean, increasingly people are using Google ODK for data collection, and you can share that. That's the Google's Open Data Kit, which is available to anybody, free from Google. Have a debate about Google, and you can overlay forms on top of that. So if you work in the wash sector, there's a very common form called M-Water, which is by WaterAid. I'm not sure what sector you're in, but I'm sure there are other, I don't know what you call them, like just layers that go over this thing, and effectively your partners or the NGO you're working with, they would collect data, and you can then share that data with them if you want to get the raw data. But then I just wanted to add one last thing for me. The last lady Tabitha, I think there's an interesting debate about whether you, well, not actually interesting from NGO people, whether you standardize reporting forms. Like there's do you set the MEL questions and then end up with yes, this community ended up with improved water and apply services, or do you just not set questions and say to partners, can you tell us what's achieved? And both of those things have advantages and disadvantages. And I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I still don't know what the best thing is. If you standardize it, you get very basic answers. If you don't standardize it, you don't have any standardization for which to collate in some kind of organizational impact. So maybe, I don't know if that's any useful, but that's just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, John, my partial answer to that is what we're trying to do, and we'll see if it works, is start with like standardized questions, like within WASH. Sorry, I know this is getting very WASH heavy because it's on the but sorry, WASH is water, sanitation, hygiene. Just too many acronyms. There's a standardized list of global questions which the UN runs through the Joint Monitoring Programme. They are very basic, but if you start with those, it means that you can report right up the ladder about what's happening. And so it's the same in education. I don't know if that's absolute fact, but I'd be so shocked if there isn't something similar in education and whatever everyone else is working on is cool. So if you can start with those standardized questions and then put in more detail where you need to, it's kind of like you get the best of both worlds, maybe. And Amanda, coming back to you on the internet point, I recently, I went to my board with a proposal which explained that we need to invest £1,000 in an internet mast for our team. And I said that is the cost of 2 flights of me going out. And I now have high quality, excellent Zoom calls with anyone in Kenya. And it also means I can link them directly with any volunteer experts from anywhere in the world to have really good chats with. And I can't believe I didn't do that 10 years ago. It was just one of those things from COVID where you're like, come on. So again, it doesn't, your donors might be like, where's my money going? But I think it is quite explainable that communication is really important for development. And, you know, it's also meant the entire community around have got really banging internet now. So nice externality.
There's some interesting stuff in the chat as well. There was something in there about evaluation of funding use and effectiveness. And I mean, did you manage to demonstrate the impact of your mast and stuff like that, the sort of effectiveness of what you're doing, I suppose? Was that from Anthony with an interesting question and a few things. I just don't want us to forget the chat.
Is Anthony there? Is Anthony able to talk? Sorry, I've got so many screens going on.
Oh, sorry.
Anthony, do you want to elaborate on that at all? So
no, I'm finding it really interesting, and I guess it's probably much bigger than ours. It's just about sort of how you evaluate just the money being spent, you know, arm's length in another country, in another culture, and the interesting bit is none of our discussion today has been about money, but I think money is really, really important to just about everybody here.
Yeah.
So it was just about, you know, evaluating spending. Is it being spent properly? Is it being stolen, misused? Although that bit for me is quite interesting, but it may not be for today's discussion.
I think you can integrate that into evaluation. Like value for money is beyond the scope of what we're going for. And I'm suddenly saw the time and panicked and said we need to speed up. But no, I think it's a totally valid point. I think what I'd say is, I think if you get M&E right, you could at least show what the impact. So you could at least then you have, we put 100 grand into this. This was the impact. Now that doesn't mean that 50 grand didn't go missing somewhere, and 50 grand actually managed to be that impact. And so you actually, you know, like that doesn't mean that, right? But you're a lot closer to getting an answer as to whether that was value for money once you got M&E right. It's part of the puzzle, I think. And the rest of it is diligent, fun accounting practices, I think. Cool. I'm going to crack straight on, guys, because I'm again got myself a little bit behind, but thanks. I hope you found that. Thanks for having contributed that. I hope you found that helpful.
On the screen, maybe I can just say to Anthony, there's a company called Manny and Daniels, which runs the UK aid program, or parts of it, and they've got what they call a remote financial audit framework, which is basically a bunch of questions that they ask people about financial trails. I'm not sure if it answers your question about whether you really would know whether there's something dodgy going on, but you know, that's possibly best standard as it is the UK aid program audit structure.
We had you muted then, Anthony, if you had something there. Thanks, John.
Yeah, yes, John, we worked for many years with Manny and Daniels. So yes, I can understand exactly what you're saying.
Great. Could you put the name in the chat? That would be great, of the company. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do it now. Hang on a second. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to push on, guys. Sorry, because I realised the time's a bit, and I want to see if everyone's finished on time for everyone. So we're just going to go on to talk about evaluations. So at this point, you've got your data. You now need to evaluate if you achieved your outputs, outcomes, and impact. The form the evaluation takes is going to be dependent on the organisation, so it's very difficult to give like prescriptive advice on this. But these are the top tips the FSI's research and definitely child my own experience I've suggested. Be clear on the purpose of the evaluation. I mean, first, make sure you know why you want to carry out the evaluation. Is it needed to report to a funder? Is it to help strategic planning? Do you want to help with develop and improve the services? All the above. All the above is very ambitious, but it might be what you need to do. Decide on the focus of the work. Do you want the evaluation to focus on a specific project or service? Are you looking to find out about outcome specific set of stakeholders? Just think about the question that you'd like to evaluate. You'd like to evaluate. Know your audience. Think about who will read the evaluation findings, what the interest will be. Especially, again, always have to have one-line fundraising, I suppose. It's a bit of a mercenary way to look at it, but I think about what, if you know your funder's going to read this, what might be particularly interested in. Decide who's going to do the work. Do you want the work to be done externally, or do you want to be done internally? You should take, when deciding that, and it comes back to the point we talked about with Tabitha, I think, earlier, in terms of how much do you invest in this? You should take consideration evaluation, the amount of resource it's going to take to evaluate. It's a difficult decision to make as to whether you want to do this in-house or get a consultant in. We've done both over the years. There's pros and cons. I think if you do it in-house, it means that your staff and team learn a lot, but also maybe you're not the best person to evaluate yourself. So the FSI, shameless plug, the FSI can help with that kind of stuff, whether through peer support or like paid consultancy. So do look into that. Consider creating an evaluation advisory group. Like for larger evaluation, advisory group can help steer what's happening. So some people just looking directly at that. So there might be a mixture of staff, trustees, external advisors. And so just to get an idea of what you're aiming towards with all this, here's some examples of like analysis and findings. So has the planned project, has the planned outputs, outcomes and quality standards been achieved? The take up of different demographics participating in activity or service. So it might be that you did something, but lots of people turned up, but it wasn't the people you were hoping would turn up. And whether any comparative findings between different cohorts or groups participating. These are some of the things that evaluation can tell you, which obviously are very, very helpful. As a case study, I'm going to absolutely whiz through because we are nearly out of time. So Village by Village, I mentioned them earlier. They were the guys with the bikes who initially saw a dip in what looked like a dip in attendance because of the reused bicycles. They actually don't work in partnership. They work directly with the villages they work with. So they work with 10 villages in Ghana. Their focus for M&E is very clearly, firstly for their funder, and equal first for their funder and for the community to get their input into the programs. Their 3 top tips are they really like a logical framework. I think it's really helpful. But there's obviously a range of views on that, as we discussed earlier. They do data collection through an intermediary, which I think actually is something my organisation could learn from. So that makes sure that the people talking to you are not telling them what they want to hear, and removes that potential massive bias from the stuff you're doing. And they also really rate community project ratings. So that's the IKEA smiley faces thing I was talking about earlier, and they do that a lot, and they do that religiously after most of the training sessions they run, for example. Yeah, and we've been through the bicycle example already, I believe. Brief bit on the principles of impact reporting. So this is like you've done your monitoring, you've done your evaluation, and now's the bit where you're trying to tell the world about it. So New Philanthropic Capital, NPC, recently researched a sample of the 100 largest charities in annual reviews. Overall, the evaluation was pretty poor. They found that the 100 large charities were really good at talking about the mission, what they did, and outputs, but less than half spoke about what had changed. And generally, there was a lack of a coherent narrative that linked activities, outcomes, and impact. Now, you can read that. I read that in 2 ways. One, it might be that big charities aren't doing a good job. 2, it might just be the stuff is really hard. And I think both is true. So I think and again, that's I think that's a slight warning for trying to be overambitious in what you're trying to monitor, evaluate. Like doing something's a lot better than doing nothing and just incrementally growing. Anyway, MPC from that devised 6 general principles. So clarity when you're reporting on impact. So they advocate for clarity so the reader can quickly and easily understand the organisation through coherent narrative, that connects charitable aims, plans, activity, results. Accessibility. So relevant information can be found by anyone who looks for it in a range of formats suitable to different stakeholders. Transparency, reporting is full, open and honest, so you haven't just cherry picked the stuff that worked. Accountability, reporting connects with stakeholders, so all the information you collected is going straight back to the communities you're serving so they can analyse it as well. Verifiability, claims about impact are backed up appropriately, and also you have an opportunity for others to externally look at the data you're collecting rather than just being your opinion on it. And proportionality, like the level of detail of reporting reflects the size, complexity of the organisation. and the complexity of the challenges they're trying to bring, complexity of changes they're trying to make. And I think that sixth point is so important for organisations like our size. Like you can't, like, or, you know, if you've got a charity with a turnover of, you know, like $250,000 or something, you can't, unless you're a research focused organisation, you're not going to be able to do a double-blinded randomised control trial lasting 10 years to like get your point across. Like you need, and that's okay, that's fine. Like organisations like us create immense value. You don't like you just need to have a good enough monitoring evaluation system in place. So you've done a lot of reporting, then you need to tell people about it. I'll whiz to this as well, but I guess my rule of thumb is that once you've done all that work and done a really fancy evaluation, and you want to tell people what's worked, what hasn't, what you're going to change your projects, as a rule of thumb, don't try and communicate it by putting it in a Word document. Really try and make the information sing in a really interesting way, and understand that not every person who is interested in the organisation will want to read the full 100-page PDF. If you have created a 100-page PDF, I'm not saying that is, you know, proportionality, etc. So this is something from Rosie May Foundation. They've gone really hard on the infographics, which I think is always really helpful because it really draws in the eye and gets people to really understand it. And they back that up with a dashboard which people can access. It's taken us years, so I'm not saying you should jump to this, but my organisation's just finished off creating a dashboard showing the levels of access across the entire county we're working with, and it's interactive, so you can pick and choose the data. And the idea that we create that with the county government. So that's like, that took us bloody ages. So like, don't aim for that to begin with, and it might not be appropriate for your organisation. This is a simpler one, which I think is equally good, when you can just see. I like something like my eyes drawn to straight away is in the bottom right hand corner. How much do you enjoy the club, the kids club are going to? Like you're like, wow, 74% gave it 10 hearts. That speaks very clearly about. To me, that speaks like the kids absolutely love this thing, and that's something to take away from it straight away. And so like these dashboards, again, I think are really, really powerful. And if you really want to push the boat out, you can make an impact calculator. So the idea is you put in the amount of money you're going to donate, and then it spits out what that means. So in this case, a solar light charity, like origination results in 2 solar lights, 9 people reached, £290 saved by families, 2012 extra hours of child study time, 2.1 tonnes of carbon emissions averted, 4 people experiencing better health. Now, I don't know what numbers back that up, but the FSI was showing me that there's some decent, like, you know, obviously this is extrapolation. I think people do take, you know, understand that when they look at this kind of thing, but that would be based on, say, the 9 people will be the average household size, the amount saved will be the amount on average people spend on firewood or kerosene or whatever in the community, and that's how much they save. Study time would be like, well, if the kid actually wants to study, they could study that long. Whether the kid actually uses the light for that, I don't know, right? But again, I think as long as these are reasonable, there can be really powerful way of communicating both your impact and, you know, if someone puts in £10 and they go, that's quite a lot. What if I put £100? That's amazing. What if I put £1,000? Oh, I want to help that many people. Brilliant. So yeah, that this is, if depends on the type of organisation, this can be quite helpful. How many time? 5 minutes left. Reviewing questions. Phew, made it. Do we have any questions, guys?
Can I ask a quick question? If you were going to say this is my favourite organisation with regards to the way that they do mail, who would you recommend as being like top notch?
The water project.
The water project, is that the name of them?
US guys, really very friendly program director as well. I'm sure like he's very like I could introduce you guys if you're interested.
Thank you.
I know.
Sorry, Tabitha?
In the chat, there's a question that someone put in earlier that didn't get answered about people always just telling you everything's brilliant because they're worried that you'll stop giving them money. I'd be interested to hear if you have any suggestions about that.
Really, I mean, obviously it's really a difficult bias to overcome. And it depends, and that bias will be there to different levels depending on loads of different factors like the visibility of the organisation, how it's presented, whether there's an intermediary being used. So again, it's a draw my own experience, but say the household wash survey we did with about 13,000 households this year, we worked with the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics to put that together, and then they were the lead on it. So it was more, it wasn't someone from Dig Deep rocking up to say, has our project worked or not? It was the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics surveying an entire area to see it was. We worked with a lot of communities in that area, and they probably aware that that information would use that information, but that did a lot, I think, to remove that bias. But yeah, it's really difficult. And again, depending on the type of organization you have and like how intense relationship is between the beneficiaries and the organization, it might be you need to bring in someone with, a lot of experience in research methods to figure out how to remove that bias, or if it is possible at all.
There's a question here, Ben, about multiple projects and whether you recommend, and I suppose it depends on the projects, but having everything grouped together in a kind of monitoring and evaluation framework, or separate sort of types of monitoring different projects, how you'd approach that.
That's really, I think if you are a small organisation that's running lots of different projects, there's some great aspects of that, but the downside is going to be, obviously going to be much harder to monitor a program working with street kids in Bangladesh and the water and sanitation project in Kenya and so on and so forth. With the best will in the world, I don't know how effective a monitor evaluation system trying to measure both those things at the same time with the same questions is going to be. It would have to be quite top level, and actually might be, I guess, what everyone's working towards, and goes back to the point raised earlier around like value for money. I think what everyone in the sector wants is this magic tool to say what is the most impactful form of aid across all sectors, holding everything else equal. And I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical to whether that's ever going to be possible. Yeah, so I don't have a good answer to that. I think it just comes down to, again, proportionality. There's a quote from Social Value UK, and they say, like, enough precision for the decision, and better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong. And I really took that to heart when I first read that, because I think that's the attitude you go into it. Because I know when I started this, it felt like such a mountain to climb that you almost don't do anything. And obviously that isn't an ethical way of behaving, because you need to monitor your impact. So yeah, you can do this iteratively. You could just set up M&E for one project. Once you're sure that's working, use the lessons you learn from that to set up the second project, and so forth, and so on and so forth, with a recommendation. Sorry, another long-winded answer.
Oh, I thought that was very good. That was very interesting, Ben. Yeah, no, it's lots of stuff being thrown up, which I'm sure everyone's sort of faced. I think I've heard that before, actually. Yeah, better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong. That's a good one. There's a question here about differentiating between M&E as such and demonstrating social return on investment, SROI, which I wonder if there's something to be said on that.
I've always seen the same thing, but Eddie, you able to talk? Maybe wrong in that.
Yeah. Well, no, everybody asks, don't they? That's what they want. They want SRO. What's the impact? Show us the impact. And is this, I tend to use sort of like a logic tree, to actually demonstrate where needed. I haven't used the line. I can't remember the other one, the final example of the three that you gave, but
yeah.
It's I guess it's trying to, as someone who's quite a novice when it comes to this level of detailed sort of reporting, is there really a distinction, or is it just semantics?
I think this is something actually raised in the breakout group I was in, is that these terms are used interchangeably and they're quite contested definitions. So exactly what SROI is might be very dependent on that donor you're talking to, or stakeholder, whoever, might have a very precise definition of that, which overlaps massively with what I'm talking about when it comes to M&E. And similar to that, the FSI refers to theories of change as a general concept, and then talks about its three categories. whereas a lot of people use theory of change just to mean the causal chain that we talked about at the end. And so it is quite confusing. I guess without knowing the definition, a bit of a cop-out to be honest, but without knowing the exact definition of SROI, I'm not really sure. But I don't know, everything we talked about would surely, if you are that MHM charity and you can show that better menstrual health is being achieved through intervention and the improved educational performance of girls happening as a result, surely that's going to help you answer the SROI question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fundamentally I'd agree, but I just think it is specifically people asking for that. They're starting to be more specific in relation to, well, yeah, okay, but what's the impact? You've done your monitoring, you've done your evaluation, yeah, but what's the impact? So I guess it's just that next level of granulation to actually give something which is that final either
I guess
qualitative or quantitative data that says, yes, we have improved people's lives by doing this.
Well, I guess are they talking about the final goal? So in that example,
yeah, fundamentally,
improved education, health, and well-being for women and girls.
Yeah.
And again, there's different levels of answer to that, right? In terms of amount of data. So one level, like the most extreme, double-blinded, randomized control trial for 10 years, or there's the education, or you can just say the school records of schools we work with, the girls are doing better than neighbouring schools. It depends on the level of evidence that person.
No, agreed. Yeah. Thank you.
I hope that helped. Again, I think I'll fudge that answer a bit, but
good enough for me.
Cool. We're quite near the end. I'm quite keen to pop up. I mean, I don't want to if everyone's able to stay on, that's great. But I'm quite keen as well, just as a side note, to launch, because I'm aware some people probably have to drop off, launch this little peer support match poll. I think there's been some interesting conversations today. If anyone's interested in being sort of matched together with someone for just sort of informal chats, but I'm just going to launch that in the background. So it's just a yes, no, if anyone would just like to be partnered up. Nothing too sort of onerous, but just a something we're running as well.